In the Northward Collective break room, my sister, the CEO, slid a cheap gray hoodie and a $70 gift card across the table. "A little something to remember us by," she smirked. "Company culture?" I zipped up the thin fabric, the plastic teeth grating against my skin. This wasn't the end. 3 months later, I stood on a stage announcing my acquisition of a $6 million luxury brand. From the very hands that gave me that hoodie, this was the beginning. My name is Nora Keene. The summons came at 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, a sterile calendar invite appearing on my screen with no context beyond "catch up, HR and CEO, 15 minutes," in the polished, bloodless world of Northward Collective. A 15-minute meeting scheduled by HR is never a catch-up. It's a clean execution. I walked the length of the 23rd floor, my heels sinking into the industrial gray carpet. The air, as always, was a chemical cocktail of burnt coffee from the perpetually on machine and the sharp, clean scent of industrial bleach used by the night crew. It was an odor that promised productivity and sterility, but only delivered headaches. Along the glass-paneled walls, the company's new slogans were printed in a bold, friendly sans-serif font. "Be bold. Be different." And the one that always made my teeth ache. "Be family." It was plastered right next to the door of the small, windowless conference room they used for these things. The irony was a physical force. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale, unflattering light on my half-sister, Harper Vale, CEO of Northward Collective. She sat at the head of the small table, a picture of corporate perfection in a tailored navy dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. Across from her sat Brenda from HR, a woman whose entire professional existence seemed to be a masterclass in avoiding direct eye contact. She was already shuffling a thin manila folder. The air was thick with unsaid words. I took the single empty chair. No one offered me water. "Nora," Harper began, her voice smooth and practiced, the kind she used for investor calls. She pushed 2 items across the brushed steel surface of the table. They slid to a stop directly in front of me. The first was a company hoodie, a cheap polyester cotton blend in a dreary shade of charcoal gray. The Northward logo was screen-printed on the chest, already looking like it might crack after a single wash. The second was a plastic gift card, the kind you buy at a supermarket checkout. It had a generic, festive design of balloons and confetti. "We're making some changes," Harper said, a small, tight smile not reaching her eyes. "A strategic restructuring to optimize our core verticals. As part of that, your role has been eliminated." Brenda cleared her throat, finally looking up from her folder, though her gaze was fixed somewhere over my left shoulder. "This is a no-cause termination. Effective immediately," she recited, her voice a monotone drone. "As per your employment agreement, you are subject to a 6-month non-compete clause within the functional athleisure market and a perpetual non-disparagement agreement." The words hung in the airless room. Restructuring, eliminated, non-compete. It was the standard language, designed to strip the humanity from the act. I looked from the flimsy hoodie to Harper's perfectly composed face. I had built the entire R&D department from nothing. I had developed the proprietary fabric bonding technique that had landed them their first major retail contract. I had worked through weekends, holidays, my own father's funeral, all for this company, for her. "Severance?" My voice was steady, betraying none of the cold fury coiling in my gut. Harper made a small, dismissive gesture toward the items on the table. "The hoodie is a gesture of our appreciation, and the card has $70 on it," she said, shrugging one sharp shoulder. "That should be enough for a nice dinner to celebrate your next chapter." $70. A nice dinner. The insult was so profound, so dismissive. It was almost brilliant in its cruelty. She wasn't just firing me. She was assigning a value to my 12 years of service, and that value was a cheap promotional item and the price of a mid-range bottle of wine. Brenda slid a single sheet of paper and a pen toward me. The separation agreement. My signature was the last piece of the puzzle. Harper stood up, a signal that the meeting was over. She walked around the table and placed her hands lightly on my shoulders. leaning in to give me a theatrical, air-light hug, the scent of her expensive perfume, something with sandalwood and entitlement, filled my senses. "Business is business, sis," she whispered, the word sis a poisoned dart. "Don't take it personally." She pulled back, her mask of CEO-level sympathy perfectly in place, but I did take it personally. I saw everything with a sudden, searing clarity. I looked down at the sleeve of the hoodie, the pilling already visible on the cheap fabric, and I didn't see a piece of clothing. I saw the ghost of my R&D budget. I saw the line item for advanced material sourcing that she had slashed 3 months ago. She'd called it trimming the fat. A week later, the company announced a multi-million-dollar PR campaign featuring a roster of C-list influencers, a campaign designed to bolster her personal brand as a visionary CEO. She hadn't trimmed fat. She'd amputated a vital organ to pay for a facelift. My organ, my work. My mind raced, connecting dots, seeing pathways I'd been blind to moments before. An idea, cold and sharp and beautiful, began to form. "Okay," I said, my voice even. I looked down at the paper. "Before I sign this, I just need 5 minutes to clear my personal effects from my desk. I'd prefer to do it now, before the office-wide email goes out." Harper exchanged a glance with Brenda. It was an unusual request, but denying it would seem petty. "Fine," Harper said. Her tone clipped. 5 minutes. Brenda will escort you." I walked back to my desk, Brenda trailing a few paces behind me like a polite prison guard. The open-plan office was buzzing with the low hum of late-afternoon work. No one looked up. No one knew yet. I sat down in my chair for the last time. My personal effects were minimal. A framed photo, a coffee mug, a dying succulent. I ignored them all. My hands moved with purpose over the keyboard, my fingers flying through a series of familiar commands. I wasn't clearing my desk. I was executing a carefully planned withdrawal. A year ago, I had personally drafted the company's intellectual property policy, buried deep in subsection 4B. A clause I had championed for the sake of morale and professional development was the personal portfolio export provision. It allowed departing employees to retain copies of their own creative work for portfolio purposes, provided it was non-patented and logged correctly. No one ever used it. No one, I was certain, even remembered it was there, except me. I opened my project directory. The work of a decade stared back at me. Every sketch, every CAD file, every material spec sheet, every design that had ever come from my mind and my team. With a few swift clicks, I initiated a transfer of the entire directory, all 12 gigabytes of it, to my secure personal cloud storage. The progress bar began to fill, a thin line of defiant green creeping across the screen. While it worked, I opened a browser and permanently deleted my saved passwords and cleared my history. I logged out of every system. The transfer completed, I did one final and comprehensive wipe of the local directory, leaving nothing behind but the company's own approved, market-ready files. The work was done. I stood up, picked up my dead plant, and turned to Brenda. "I'm ready." Back in the conference room, Harper was scrolling through her phone, looking bored. I sat down, picked up the pen, a cheap plastic ballpoint with the Northward logo already flaking off its side, a perfect prophecy of the company's future, and signed my name on the line. The ink was a dark, final slash. I slid the paper back across the table. I stood up, the hoodie folded neatly under my arm. Harper didn't look up from her phone. "Good luck, Nora," she said to the glowing screen. I didn't say anything back. There was nothing left to say. In the glass elevator, descending the 23 floors, the city of Briarfield spread out below me, a grid of glittering lights against the twilight. I was alone. I could feel the vibrations of the building, the hum of hundreds of people still working, still believing in the slogans on the walls. I took the $70 gift card from my pocket and looked at the ridiculous balloons. Then, I opened my wallet, found an empty slot behind my driver's license, and slid the card inside. It fit perfectly. "Thanks, Harper," I thought, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. my first round of seed money. The concept of a family business died with our father. Harper and I weren't sisters who inherited a legacy. We were two recipients of a fractured inheritance, unequal from the start. Harper went to Wharton, came back with an MBA and a vocabulary full of words like synergy and optimization. She was parachuted into a strategic planning role at Northward, a position our father created for her. I started 3 years earlier, as an unpaid intern in the pattern room, learning the language of fabric grain and stitch tension, the real foundation of the company. I climbed. I worked my way through every department, from sorting buttons to managing the dye lots. I learned the supply chain not from a PowerPoint deck, but from visiting the mills in North Carolina, breathing in the cotton dust. By the time I was made head of R&D, I knew every supplier, every machine, and every seamstress by name. Harper, meanwhile, learned how to talk to venture capitalists. And she was good at it. After our father's sudden heart attack, she used her polish and her MBA to secure a Series B funding round from the Rutledge Capital Fund. The will had left us both minority shares. But the Rutledge deal came with preferred stock and a reconstituted board. Harper's position as CEO was cemented not by family loyalty, but by the fund's voting power. They saw in her a ruthless operator who could deliver a return on their investment. They were not wrong. The illusion of family, however, was a crucial part of the brand's public-facing identity. Every Thanksgiving, a photographer would be hired to capture us, Harper and me, posing with our employees at the company-sponsored charity drive, all of us wearing matching Northward fleece vests. The photos would go up on the company's social media with hashtags like Northward Family and Giving Back. The reality was a landscape of cold, hard metrics. Behind the office doors, it wasn't about family. It was about KPIs, quarterly earnings calls, and the quiet, efficient removal of anyone who didn't meet their numbers. People I had worked with for a decade would vanish overnight, their desks wiped clean, their existence reduced to a single, sterile email from HR. Harper was the architect of this culture, the one who signed off on every cut, every frozen salary. Her favorite phrase, deployed in board meetings and performance reviews alike, was, "It's not personal." She said it when she rejected my proposal for sustainable fabric development because the upfront cost was too high. She said it when she laid off half the quality control team right before Christmas. But I knew better. With Harper, it was always personal. Every decision was a calculated move to consolidate her own power, to burnish her own image. My success in R&D, my deep institutional knowledge, wasn't an asset to her. It was a threat. It was a reminder of a part of the business she didn't understand and couldn't fully control. My firing wasn't a restructuring, it was an exorcism. Back in my rented apartment, the silence was deafening. The cheap gray hoodie lay on my coffee table like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. The first thing I did was pour myself a glass of whiskey. The second was to open my laptop. I navigated to LinkedIn, my profile a static monument to a career that had just been vaporized. I spent 20 minutes carefully rewording my headline, crafting a summary that highlighted my skills in material innovation and supply chain management without ever mentioning the Northward name. Then, I flipped the switch on the Open to Work feature, the green banner wrapping around my profile picture like a signal flare. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox, normally a quiet place of industry newsletters and connection requests, began to ping incessantly. It wasn't recruiters with generic job listings. It was the real people of the industry. It was a message from the owner of a small, family-run mill in Ohio, whose quality I had always championed. A textile engineer from a technical fabrics company in the Carolinas I'd collaborated with on a project 3 years ago. A former Northward factory manager who'd been part of an earlier restructuring. They weren't just offering jobs, they were offering solidarity. They knew my work, they knew my value, and they knew Harper's reputation. I let the messages flood in, each one a small validation, a counter-argument to the $70 valuation Harper had placed on my head. Then I turned my attention back to the hoodie. I ran my fingers over the fabric, feeling the cheapness of the knit, the sloppy stitching on the seams, This was not the quality I had insisted on for our products. This was a low-bid item from a mass supplier, designed for promotional events, not for a consumer. I found the care tag sewn into the side. It was a standard tag, but beneath it, I felt a small, hard rectangle. Using a pair of tweezers, I carefully unpicked the seam and extracted a tiny RFID tag. It was a supply chain tracker. I recognized the manufacturer's code. It was one of the largest suppliers in Southeast Asia. A company I knew had an exclusive contract with Northward for their low-end promotional goods. I placed the tiny chip in a small plastic bag and labeled it Evidence. Next, I opened the separation agreement I had scanned before leaving the office. I reread the non-compete clause a dozen times, letting the words marinate. Prohibited from engaging in, or being employed by, any business that directly competes in the functional athleisure apparel market. Athleisure. The word was a cage, but every cage has a key. They had been specific. Functional athleisure. It was the core of Northward's business, but it wasn't the whole of the apparel world. The clause said nothing about luxury goods, nothing about high-end, ready-to-wear fashion. It was a loophole, a Harper-sized loophole, born of arrogance and a lack of imagination. She couldn't conceive of me operating in a world beyond the one she herself dominated. The next morning, I called Maya, a friend from law school who now specialized in corporate law. I met her at a coffee shop far from the financial district, laying out the situation in quiet, precise terms. She read the non-compete clause, a slow smile spreading across her face. They defined the market, she said, tapping the paper. That was their mistake. They put a fence around a specific pasture, but they left the rest of the world wide open. Did you design anything outside of athleisure while you were there? I thought of the files now sitting on my cloud server, the private passion projects, the designs deemed not commercial enough or too avant-garde for the Northward brand, the elegant, minimalist pieces I'd sketched in my spare time. Yes, I said, and I have time-stamped proof that I created them before my termination date. Maya took a sip of her latte. Then you have a clear path. Set up a new entity. Keep everything separate. No commingling of funds or ideas. Build a wall between your past and your future. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Form a Delaware LLC. It's anonymous, and the legal protections are ironclad. And Nora? Run. Don't walk. That afternoon, I paid the $100 fee online, and Larkspur & Copos, LLC, was officially incorporated in the state of Delaware. I set up a new email address, a new bank account, a new phone number. I built the wall Maya had described, brick by digital brick. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I opened a new workspace in Notion. I typed in the title, The Hoodie Plan. It was a ridiculous, petty name, but it felt right. It felt powerful. I created the first page and titled it, Phase 1, The Foundation. Underneath, I started making a list. Finalize corporate structure. Analyze personal design archive. Identify key manufacturing partners. Develop brand identity. Each new line item was a quiet declaration of intent. Each page in the plan would be a step, a carefully placed stone on the path ahead. Harper had written me off for the price of a cheap meal. She had no idea I was about to use her $70 to buy myself a feast, and she was going to be the main course. The days following my termination were a blur of forced unemployment and quiet, methodical work. While the world saw a woman taking long, aimless walks through the city's residential neighborhoods, I was actually conducting market research. I was decompressing, yes, but I was also observing. I watched how a well-cut coat fell on a stranger's shoulders, how a woman's dress moved as she hailed a cab. I was unlearning the Northward aesthetic, mass-produced, trend-driven, disposable, and reconnecting with the principles of design that had drawn me to this industry in the first place: form, function, and longevity. My evenings were spent in my digital archive, the treasure trove of designs I had secured on my way out. There, in a folder labeled Archive Personal, were 27 sketches Harper had dismissed over the years. Her reasons were always vague and corporate-sounding. "It doesn't align with our current marketing push," or "the SKU count is too complex for our inventory system," or "the ultimate kiss of death. It's just not commercial." What she meant was that they weren't cheap to produce. They were designs that required skill. They featured minimalist lines, complex internal tailoring, and seams that were meant to be invisible. They were quiet, confident pieces in a market that only knew how to shout. They were perfect. I spent a week poring over them, printing them out and pinning them to the largest wall in my apartment. I wasn't just looking at sketches. I was looking for a narrative, a collection that could tell a story. I narrowed the 27 down to 6 core silhouettes: a sharply tailored blazer, a pair of wide-leg trousers with a hidden drape, a high-necked silk blouse, a structured trench coat, a simple sheath dress, and an asymmetrical knit sweater. They were foundational pieces, the kind of garments that could anchor an entire wardrobe. I named each one after the streets that had become my sanctuary during my walks. The blazer was the Vesper, the trousers, the Linden, the coat, the Rowan. The next step was the most terrifying: turning digital lines into physical objects. I needed a partner I could trust implicitly. I thought of a small, family-owned cutting workshop in Asheville I'd worked with years ago, before Northward had mercilessly consolidated its supply chain to 3 massive overseas factories. I found the number for Witt & Sons and dialed, my heart pounding. An elderly, slightly gravelly voice answered. "Witt & Sons? Mr. Witt, it's Nora Keene." There was a pause, then a warm recognition. "Nora, it's been too long. I heard you were running the whole show up there in Briarfield. We were all so proud of you." The words were a balm on a wound I didn't realize was still so fresh. "Something like that," I said, keeping my voice light. "Listen, I'm no longer with Northward. I'm starting something on my own. Something small and different. I need a small production run. 50 pieces total across 6 styles. The highest quality work." He didn't ask why I'd left Northward. People in this business have long memories, and they know how to read between the lines. "You know my work, Nora. It's always the highest quality, but a run that small, the setup costs." "I know," I interrupted gently. "I can pay for the setup and a 50% deposit on materials up front." I looked at my personal savings account, a number that seemed to shrink with every passing second. Then I looked at the $70 gift card on my desk. "I'll wire the funds today." "You send me the patterns," he said, his voice firm. "We'll make it work." The next call was to an organic dye house in North Carolina, another small business discarded by Northward in its pursuit of scale. The owner, a woman named Clara, had been a pioneer in sustainable dyeing techniques. When I told her my plan, she cut me off. "Say no more. We're in. And just so you know, we'll do this for you. Nora, not for her." That unspoken solidarity was more valuable than any venture capital. That night, fueled by coffee and a potent mix of terror and adrenaline, I sat at my laptop. At 2:13 a.m., I purchased the domain name vesperlane.com. The confirmation email arrived with a quiet ping. It was real. Vesper Lane was real. My heart was hammering against my ribs with the rhythmic, percussive sound of a sewing machine hitting its stride. But I couldn't do it alone. The next day, I arranged to meet 2 of my most talented former colleagues for coffee. Maya, a pattern maker with an almost supernatural understanding of how fabric drapes on the human form, and Jules, a merchandising genius who could build a brand narrative out of thin air. Both had been casualties of Harper's recent restructuring. They listened intently as I laid out the entire plan, my voice low and urgent in the bustling cafe. I showed them the 6 core designs on my tablet. I told them about Witt & Sons, about the dye house, about the Vesper Lane domain. "It's a beautiful dream, Nora," Maya said softly, tracing the line of a collar on the screen. "But we have mortgages, we have kids. A dream doesn't pay the bills." "I can't offer you a big salary right now," I admitted. "I can't even offer a small one. What I can offer is ownership. I pushed 2 folders across the table. Inside were incorporation documents for Larkspur & Co., with signatory pages waiting. 10% equity, each. We build this together. We own it together. We succeed. We all succeed. We fail. We fail together, Jules finished, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. She looked at Maya, who nodded, a new light in her eyes. Harper valued us in billable hours. You're valuing us with a piece of the future. I'm in. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of focused, exhilarating work. My apartment became our headquarters. Maya refined the patterns, turning my 2-dimensional sketches into precise, technical blueprints. Jules built the brand identity, crafting the story of Vesper Lane. She wrote the copy for the website, short, elegant, and powerful. Our tagline, which she came up with after a 3-hour debate, was perfect. Quiet lines, loud standards. While they worked, I focused on the mechanics. I double-checked my old non-disclosure agreement. All of the Vesper Lane designs were created from my personal archive, provably predating my employment, and the new work we were doing was entirely separate. We were legally fireproofed. I reached out to a local TV stylist I knew, a woman with impeccable taste and a roster of clients. I offered her one of the first production samples, the Vesper, in a stunning midnight black, not for a placement, but as a barter for her honest, brutal feedback on the fit and finish. I set up our storefront on Shopify, choosing the most minimalist theme I could find. The photography was stark. The garments were shot on a simple mannequin against a pure white background. No models, no lifestyle shots. The clothes had to speak for themselves. I built the product pages, meticulously creating the SKU codes, inventory trackers, and pricing matrix. On the wall where my design sketches once hung, I taped up a massive sheet of butcher paper. On it, I drew our entire operational flowchart: sourcing, cutting, dyeing, sewing, finishing, shipping. I mapped out lead times, inventory levels, and cash flow. In the bottom right corner, I wrote our most important number, the one that governed all our decisions. Break even, 112 units. That was the target. That was the number that stood between survival and failure. Looking at that map, at the tangible plan for our future, I felt a confidence I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a dream anymore. It was a machine, and we had just turned the engine on. The launch of Vesper Lane was not a launch at all. It was a single, precisely aimed shot in the dark. We had no marketing budget, no PR firm, no influencers on retainer. All we had was a story and a single, potent symbol of corporate disregard: the cheap gray hoodie. Jules, our merchandising and branding genius, orchestrated the first move. We didn't create a splashy Vesper Lane brand account filled with aspirational lifestyle photos. Instead, we created a new, anonymous Instagram account. The profile picture was a stark, black and white graphic of a broken price tag. The bio read simply, "Your value is not negotiable." Our first and only post went live at 8 a.m. on a Monday. It was a high contrast, artfully shot photo of the gray Northward hoodie. It was crumpled on a concrete floor, looking as pathetic and disposable as it was. The lighting was harsh, like an evidence photo. The caption was short, sharp, and lethal. When a company values you at $70, you have 2 choices. You can believe them, or you can price yourself higher. Below the caption, there was a single hashtag, more than a hoodie. We didn't tag Northward. We didn't mention Harper. We didn't have to. The story was universal. Within hours, the hashtag started to move. It was first picked up by a small network of recently laid-off tech workers. Then it spread to creative professionals, then to retail employees. People began sharing their own stories of being devalued, of insulting severance packages, of being reduced to a line item on a spreadsheet. They used our hashtag, attaching their stories to our symbol. The gray hoodie became an effigy for every unceremonious exit, every "it's not personal" dismissal. We hadn't just created a post. We had provided a rallying cry for the corporate disenfranchised. By Wednesday, the post had caught the attention of a journalist who ran a popular, fiercely independent blog about workplace culture called The Water Cooler. She messaged the anonymous account, asking for an interview. I agreed, on the condition that my identity and the company's name remained completely anonymous. We spoke on the phone for an hour. I told her the story, the 15-minute meeting, the hoodie, the $70 card, the business is business, sis. I told her about starting a new venture based on the designs my old company had deemed not commercial. The article she published was titled, How a $70 Severance Package Accidentally Funded a Revenge Startup. It was a masterclass in controlled outrage. It went viral. Someone posted it to the subreddit RS Work Reform, a massive online community dedicated to workers' rights and anti-corporate sentiment. The post hit the front page. The link in the article directed readers to the Vesper Lane Shopify site, and for the first time, we heard the sound, a crisp, digital cha-ching from Jules's laptop. It was our first sale, then another, and another. The sound, at first a novelty, became a steady rhythm. In the first 24 hours after the article went live, we sold 60 pieces. 60. Our break-even point was 112. We were more than halfway there in a single day, fueled by the righteous anger of strangers. The victory was sweet, but I knew it would come at a price. On Friday, the email landed in my new Larkspur & Coty inbox. The sender was Harper Vale. The subject line was a blunt, uppercase, cease and desist. It has come to my attention, she wrote, that you are engaging in a defamatory social media campaign and operating a competing business in violation of your signed separation agreement. This is your one and only warning. Cease all operations and desist from any further public commentary immediately, or our legal team will take swift and aggressive action. It was a classic Harper move, all aggression, no precision, but she had made a fatal error. In her haste and fury, she had not only sent the email to my official Larkspur address, but had also CC'd a dozen other people. It was a list that included Northward's general counsel, 2 board members from the Rutledge Fund, and, inexplicably, a high-profile fashion model who had been the face of Northward's holiday campaign 2 years prior. It was a spectacular, self-inflicted wound. I waited exactly 1 hour before I replied. Hitting reply all, my response was polite, professional, and surgically precise. Dear Harper, I wrote, thank you for your email. I believe there may be a misunderstanding. Vesper Lane is a luxury ready-to-wear brand, a market segment in which Northward Collective does not operate. As such, it falls outside the scope of the non-compete clause, which is explicitly limited to the functional athleisure apparel market. For clarity, I invite you and your legal team to review Section 4B of the separation agreement. I wish you and Northward all the best. Sincerely, Nora Keene. The digital silence that followed was deafening. I had not only called her bluff, but I had done it in front of her board members and a well-connected industry figure. I had used her own legal document as a shield, and in doing so, made her look both foolish and bullying. While Harper was licking her wounds, our second front opened up. The stylist I had given the Vesper blazer to called me, breathless. She had put it on a client, a charismatic author and micro-influencer from Denver, who was appearing on a local morning talk show to promote her new book. The woman wore the blazer. She looked incredible. The host complimented her on it, and the author, unprompted, mentioned the brand name. It's from a new designer, Vesper Lane. The quality is just incredible. Within minutes, our website traffic exploded. These weren't the solidarity buyers from the work reform blogs. These were women who saw a beautiful garment and wanted it. The Vesper blazer sold out in an hour. We were no longer just a revenge story. We were a fashion brand. It was time to escalate. Jules and I worked through the night to launch our first official campaign. We called it Severance to Seed. The concept was simple. We added a banner to the top of our website. They gave us a severance. We're giving it back. The copy explained that for every single order placed, Vesper Lane would donate $7, 10% of my own severance, to a nonprofit fund that provided financial assistance to workers who had been laid off without cause. We turned Harper's insult into our mission statement. The first night of the campaign, my apartment was silent except for one sound: the relentless, joyful cha-ching from the Shopify app. It was a cascade, a digital rainstorm of validation. At one point, the pings were coming so fast, they blended into a continuous tone. I looked over at Jules, who was staring at the real-time sales map, watching dots light up across the country. Tears were streaming down her face. She looked at me and whispered, "We're doing it, Nora. We're really doing it." We had passed our break-even point and were now solidly, miraculously profitable. The next morning, amidst the flurry of shipping notifications and customer service emails, a new message appeared in my inbox. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but his email signature was not. He was a well-known angel investor in the direct-to-consumer space. His message was 5 words long. "Pitch deck, tomorrow, 9 a.m. My heart leaped into my throat. This was the moment that could change everything, that could catapult us from a kitchen table startup into a real company. I thought about the hours it would take to pull together a proper pitch deck, the financial projections, the market analysis, the growth strategy. Then I looked at the $70 gift card, which I had propped up on my desk like a trophy, and I knew what I had to do. I took out my phone, placed the gift card on a clean white background, and took a single, high-resolution photo. I attached the image to a reply email. I wrote no text, no explanation. I just sent the picture. 2 minutes later, he replied, "See you at 9. The $800,000 seed round was closed 2 days later. The term sheet wasn't signed in a sterile boardroom or a high-priced lawyer's office. The 3 of us, me, Maya, and Jules, sat across from the investor at my small kitchen table. As he signed the final document, I looked down at the floor, at the cheap, cracked linoleum tiles that had served as the backdrop for the birth of our company. We had turned a weapon of humiliation into an arsenal of creation, and we were just getting started. With the seed money secured, the adrenaline of creation began to cool and settle into something harder, colder, and far more dangerous: strategy. The early success of Vesper Lane was a victory, but it was a battle won on the open field of public opinion and brand narrative. To truly win the war, I had to move from the storefront to the supply chain. I had to attack the infrastructure that kept Northward alive. Harper fought with press releases and empty threats. I was about to fight with contracts and shipping manifests. My first target was her material pipeline. For years at Northward, I had been the one who negotiated the supplier agreements. I knew them better than the company's own lawyers. I spent 2 full days combing through the digital copies I had legally archived, my eyes scanning the dense legalese for a single point of leverage. I found it in the exclusivity clause of their contract with their primary textile mill in the Carolinas, the very mill that produced their signature performance knit fabric. The clause was ironclad, granting Northward exclusive rights to any novelty athleisure knit textiles developed by the mill. It was designed to choke out competitors, but like Harper's non-compete, it was a cage built with a specific key. The exclusivity was limited to knits. Vesper Lane's collection was built on beautifully structured, tailored wovens. It was a different category of fabric altogether. Another loophole, courtesy of Harper's one-dimensional view of the industry. I called Clara, the owner of the organic dye house who was already working with us. Her network in the Carolinas was deep and loyal. I asked her about the textile mill, the one Northward had locked into that exclusivity deal. "They're struggling, Nora," Clara told me, her voice grim. "Northward is their biggest client, but they're a terrible partner. They demand exclusivity but pay on a net 90 basis. And lately, they've been stretching it to 120 days. They're choking the mill's cash flow. Why?" "I have an idea," I said. I called the mill's owner directly. I introduced myself and Vesper Lane. I told him I needed a reliable partner for high-quality woven fabrics. I proposed a deal. I would take any unused production slots on his looms, the downtime created by Northward's erratic ordering, and I would pay a premium. More importantly, I would pay on a net 15 basis, cash, in his bank, 2 weeks after delivery. He was silent for a long moment. Northward will have my head. The exclusivity clause is for knits, I countered gently. My order is for wovens. You wouldn't be in breach. You would simply be utilizing your assets more efficiently, and you would be getting paid on time. He agreed. He was a businessman being offered a lifeline, and loyalty doesn't pay the bills when your biggest client is bleeding you dry. The next day, I placed an order that, while small, was a strategic thorn in Harper's side. But that was just the beginning. I knew Northward's finances were stretched thin. A company that's slow to pay one supplier is slow to pay them all, with the help of my lawyer, Maya. I began a quiet investigation. We found another major supplier, a fabric importer, that Northward owed a significant, past-due invoice for a massive shipment of technical nylon, the key component for their upcoming autumn jacket collection. The fabric was sitting in a warehouse, allocated to Northward, but not yet paid for. Maya explained the next move. We can file a UCC-1 financing statement, she said, a predatory gleam in her eye. It's a legal notice that a creditor has a security interest in a debtor's personal property. In this case, we approach the supplier, offer to buy the debt from them for a small discount, and then we file a lien against that specific lot of fabric. Northward can't touch it, can't move it, can't use it until the lien is satisfied. It was a ruthless, elegant move. It was a corporate chokehold. We executed it perfectly. We paid the supplier, filed the lien, and effectively seized control of Northward's entire raw material inventory for their most important seasonal launch. We had cut off the head of the snake. 2 weeks later, the first tremor hit. A company-wide memo from Harper was leaked to me by a sympathetic former colleague still inside. It announced that the launch of the highly anticipated Momentum Fall jacket line was being indefinitely postponed due to unforeseen market shifts and supply chain disruptions. It was a lie wrapped in corporate jargon. The supply chain wasn't disrupted. It was blockaded by me. That afternoon, my phone rang. The number was the main switchboard for the Northward Collective headquarters. My blood ran cold. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, the voice familiar and clipped with stress. Nora, it's Owen Frost. We need to talk. Coffee? Tomorrow. My treat. Owen Frost was Northward's CFO. He was a numbers man, famously emotionless and ruthlessly pragmatic. He had been with the company for 15 years and was one of the few executives who had survived Harper's ascent because he was too competent to be fired. A meeting with Owen was not something to be taken lightly. We met at a neutral, anonymous coffee shop halfway between my apartment and his office. He looked tired. The crisp confidence he usually projected was frayed at the edges. He got straight to the point. "The jacket launch is a disaster," he said, not touching his coffee. "The lien on the nylon shipment has triggered a review from our primary lender. They're looking at our loan covenants." I stayed silent, letting him talk. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. He slid a small black USB flash drive across the table. It was unmarked. "Harper has been optimistic in her reports to the board and the bank," he said, choosing his words with extreme care. "She's been reporting initial wholesale shipments as final sell-through, artificially inflating the velocity metrics. The bank is starting to ask questions that are very difficult to answer. If they determine we're in breach of our liquidity covenant, they could call the loan. It would be catastrophic." My mind raced. This was more than I could have hoped for. I hadn't just disrupted her operations. I had inadvertently shined a light on her fraud. Owen wasn't a traitor. He was a pragmatist trying to save the ship before its captain ran it aground. He was giving me the ammunition I needed. I looked him in the eye. "What do you want, Owen?" "I want the company to survive," he said simply. "The board needs a solution, a fast one. They need to show the bank they're taking decisive action to shore up the balance sheet." An idea, audacious and fully formed, presented itself. I leaned forward. "What if I offered them one? Northward has a small, neglected division, blackline tailoring. It was our father's original bespoke suiting business. Harper has starved it of resources, but the brand name still has value. And the workshop is filled with skilled artisans. It's a non-core asset, if the board is looking for a liquidity event. My company, Larkspur & County, will make a cash offer to purchase it. Owen's eyes widened slightly. He saw the play immediately. I'm talking about a clean asset purchase, I continued, pressing my advantage. We buy the brand, the equipment, the patterns, and offer employment to the staff. We assume zero of Northward's debt. It's a simple, fast transaction that injects immediate cash into the company. We can close in 15 days. He was already nodding, the gears turning in his CFO's brain. Selling a neglected asset to stabilize the company and satisfy the bank was a move the board would understand. It was a move they would applaud. They'll listen, Owen said, a new energy in his voice. Especially if I present them with a formal letter of intent right after I present them with the evidence of a potential covenant breach. He gestured to the USB drive. I picked up the small piece of plastic. It felt heavy in my hand, dense with consequence. I didn't need to check its contents. I trusted the weary desperation in Owen's eyes. Send me the division's financials, I said. I'll have a letter of intent on your desk by Monday. He nodded, stood up, and left without another word. Back in my apartment, I placed the USB drive on the shelf next to my desk. It sat directly beside the $70 gift card, which I had mounted in a small acrylic frame. The card was the insult that had started this. The drive was the weapon that would finish it. They were two sides of the same coin. My two most valuable assets, my two treasures. The boardroom on the 24th floor was Harper's throne room. It was a space engineered for intimidation, with a monolithic marble table, sweeping views of the city, and the hushed, reverent silence of serious money. I had only been in it a handful of times, always as a subordinate, summoned to present R&D findings. Today, I was not summoned. I was arriving. Through the smoked glass walls, I could see the key players already assembled. Harper, naturally, sat at the head of the table, a position of command she occupied with practiced ease. Her posture was ramrod straight, her chin tilted up with a familiar, defiant arrogance. To her right and left sat the two partners from the Rutledge Capital Fund, men in their 50s with identical gray suits and impassive, predatory faces. A team of corporate lawyers flanked them, their laptops open, their faces grim, and at the far end of the table, looking small but resolute, was Owen Frost, a stack of folders neatly squared before him. I waited in the anteroom, as instructed by Owen. The first part of the meeting was his. He was the inside man, the one who would lay the gunpowder trail. I was the match. Owen began, his voice the steady, dispassionate tone of a physician delivering a terminal diagnosis. He walked the board through the financials. He didn't use inflammatory language. He didn't need to. The numbers were a horror story on their own. Negative cash flow for 2 consecutive quarters. Days sales outstanding stretched to an unsustainable 127 days. And the fatal blow? A covenant coverage ratio of 0.89x, a clear breach of the 1.0x minimum required by their primary lender. The cash position is critical, Owen stated, his gaze fixed on the Rutledge partners. But the more immediate issue is the breach of covenant. The bank is already aware of a potential issue, stemming from a disruption in the supply chain for the fall collection. I could see Harper stiffen. She opened her mouth to interrupt, to spin, but Owen was already moving to his next point, projecting a document onto the large screen at the front of the room. It was an email, from Harper, to Owen. As you can see from this correspondence dated 3 months ago, Owen continued, his voice unwavering. A directive was given to temporarily adjust the sell-through reporting methodology to better reflect forward-looking momentum. This is the primary reason for the discrepancy between the figures reported to the bank and the current operational reality. He had done it. He had presented the evidence, cold and irrefutable. The room was utterly silent. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "We have a representative from the lending institution on video conference," he announced. A new face appeared on the screen, a stern-looking woman from the bank's workout division. "We have reviewed Mr. Frost's preliminary findings," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "As of this moment, we are declaring Northward Collective in technical default of its credit facility. You have 7 business days to present a viable remediation plan. If you fail to do so, we will be forced to accelerate the loan." The threat hung in the air, a guillotine poised to drop. Accelerating the loan would mean bankruptcy. It was the corporate death penalty. Harper finally spoke, her voice tight with fury. "This is a temporary setback, orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee. We have already engaged counsel to—" "We need a plan," Ms. Vale, one of the Rutledge partners, interjected, his voice like ice. "Not excuses." That was my cue. Owen caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. I pushed open the heavy glass door and walked in. Every head turned. The sense of shock in the room was a palpable force. I walked calmly to the table, placed my leather portfolio down, and took the single empty seat directly across from Harper. "My name is Nora Keene," I said to the room, my voice clear and steady. "I am the founder and principal of Larkspur & Conan. I am here today because I understand you are in need of a liquidity solution. I have one to offer." Harper let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. "You have got to be kidding me. Nora, who in God's name do you think you are?" I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I reached into my portfolio and slid a plain manila envelope across the polished marble. It glided silently, coming to a stop directly in front of her. Her name was not on it. Nothing was. She looked at it, then back at me, a sneer playing on her lips. "What is this?" "An appraisal," I said. She tore it open. Inside was not a legal document, but a single, high-gloss 8x10 photograph. It was the picture I had used for my investor pitch, the cheap gray hoodie and the $70 gift card, arranged starkly on a white background. Her face, for a fleeting moment, lost its composure. The color drained from her cheeks. "That," I said, my voice low but carrying in the silent room, "is the value you assign to me. I am here today to value one of your assets, and I can assure you, my offer is significantly higher." One of the Rutledge partners, the one who had spoken before, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Larkspur & Co. What is the business? What brand are you operating?" I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display. My carefully prepared, 3-slide presentation filled the screen. The first slide was the Vesper Lane logo. The second was a curated collection of our press mentions and glowing reviews. The third was the one that mattered. It was a clean, brutal dashboard of our metrics since launch. Gross merchandise volume, our astonishingly low customer return rate of less than 2%, our month-over-month growth, and our net profit margin. The numbers were not just good, they were extraordinary for a brand so new. I had built a lean, efficient, high-margin business from the ground up in less than 4 months. A thick silence descended on the room, lasting for what felt like an eternity. 6 seconds. The only sound was the soft rustle of pages as the fund manager flipped through his notebook, his pen scratching furiously. He was comparing my success with Harper's failure. Finally, Northward's lead counsel, a man named Marcus, tapped his pen on the table. "Let's be pragmatic," he said, directing his words to the Rutledge partners, pointedly ignoring Harper. "We are bleeding cash. We are in technical default. We are facing potential litigation from our lender. An asset sale of a non-core, underperforming division is a clean, swift way to inject capital, reduce our operational drag, and demonstrate proactive management to the bank." He looked at me. "What are the terms of the offer?" "An all-cash purchase of the Blackline tailoring brand and its associated assets," I said. "We close in 72 hours. The speed of the offer was a masterstroke. It was faster than the bank's deadline. I was offering them not just a solution, but an instant one. Harper slammed her hand on the table. "Absolutely not. I veto this. This is a transparently hostile maneuver, and I will not permit it. Marcus, the lawyer, didn't even look at her. He continued to address the partners. Actually, she can't. Harper's head snapped toward him. What did you say? Under the terms of the credit facility, Marcus explained, his tone clinical, upon an event of default, the board is empowered to take any and all necessary actions to cure the default. The CEO's standard operational veto does not apply to asset sales undertaken for the specific purpose of satisfying the lender's covenants. He finally turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. You don't have a vote, Harper. Your authority in this matter is suspended. The finality of his words struck her like a physical blow. She stared at him, then at the partners, her mouth slightly agape. For the first time, she looked completely and utterly powerless. She had been so focused on the personal battle against me that she had forgotten the impersonal rules of the money that kept her in power, and those rules had just checkmated her. The game was over. The moment the boardroom door closed behind me, the war shifted to a new front. The battle for Northward's assets had been won in the sterile confines of the 24th floor, but the battle for the narrative was about to be fought in the chaotic, unforgiving arena of public opinion. Harper's power was built on her carefully constructed public image, and I intended to dismantle it, brick by brick, using the one thing she could never control, the truth. Before the ink was even dry on the asset purchase agreement, I made the first move. I logged into the Vesper Lane website and hit publish on a blog post I had written weeks ago. Waiting for the perfect moment, the title was the same as the article that had first put us on the map. How a $70 severance funded a brand. But this time, it was not an anonymous interview. It was a first-person account, written by me. I told the whole story, but with surgical precision. I never once mentioned Northward Collective by name, referring to it only as my former company. I never once used Harper's name, calling her only the CEO. The details, however, were specific and damning. The cheap gray hoodie, the $70 gift card, the phrase, business is business, sis. I laid out the story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a story of rebirth, of how being devalued by a corporate machine became the catalyst for creating a brand built on the principle of intrinsic worth. The post ended not with anger, but with a quiet statement of purpose and a link to the Severance to Seed Fund. The post exploded. It was a targeted detonation, without naming names. I had given the entire community that had followed the More Than a Hoodie saga the ending to the story they had pieced together. My phone began to ring off the hook. Local news stations, national business journals, industry podcasts, they all wanted an interview. They all wanted the name of the company, the name of the CEO. I instructed my team to politely decline every single request. My story was on the blog. In my own words, I would not engage in a public dogfight. My silence was a strategic choice. It made me look like I was taking the high road, while simultaneously creating an information vacuum that a curious public and an even more curious media would rush to fill themselves. They would connect the dots, and they did. While the media was in a frenzy, we focused on our customers. That weekend, we hosted our first Vesper Lane pop-up shop in a rented gallery space downtown. We expected a modest turnout. Instead, we were met with a line that stretched down the block and around the corner before we even opened the doors. The people who came weren't just shoppers. They were pilgrims. They came with their own stories. A man who had been a creative director for 20 years, laid off via a group Zoom call. A woman who had been given a parting gift of a branded water bottle after a decade of service. We listened to them, and then we did something unplanned. For every customer who purchased a piece from the collection and shared their story, we offered to hand-stitch their first name into the lining, right below the Vesper Lane label. It was a small, intimate gesture, a way of acknowledging their history and making them part of ours. The pop-up became less of a retail event and more of a collective healing session, a testament to the community we were building. The buzz was reaching a fever pitch. In the middle of the pop-up, I received a frantic text from the stylist who had taken the Vesper blazer. She was backstage at the Regional Film and Television Awards. An actress, a local favorite, had a wardrobe malfunction with her gown, and the stylist had put her in the black Vesper blazer with a pair of silk trousers at the last minute. A photographer from a major wire service snapped a picture of her backstage. The photo, showing the actress looking effortlessly chic and powerful, went out on the wire. Within an hour, Vesper Lane was trending on Twitter. I knew Harper would be watching all of this, her fury mounting with every positive press mention, every sold-out product, and I knew she would not be able to resist retaliating. Her response came, as expected. With all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, Northward hastily announced a new luxury capsule collection designed to compete directly with Vesper Lane. It was a desperate, reactive move. They rushed it to market in weeks, and the result was a disaster. The fabric, sourced from a second-rate supplier after I had locked up their primary one, was stiff and cheap. The reviews were brutal. Fashion bloggers who had once praised Harper's business acumen now openly mocked the shoddy construction and sloppy stitching. The day after the board officially ratified the sale of Blackline Tailoring, I met Owen Frost at the same coffee shop as before. He slid a folder across the table. The final purchase and sale agreement. I signed the documents that officially transferred ownership of my father's original legacy to me. My first act as the new owner was to buy up Blackline's entire existing inventory of high-end wools and silks, the very materials Harper had just proven she no longer had access to. I was now not only her competitor, but her former supplier. With the deal legally closed, it was time to make our move public and official. We didn't leak it. We didn't post it on a blog. We issued a formal press release to all the major financial and fashion news outlets. The headline was clear and direct. Larkspur & Co. acquires Blackline Tailoring Division from Northward Collective. Will relaunch as Vesper Lane Atelier. The release confirmed everything the public had been speculating about for weeks. It named the names. It connected all the dots. It was a quiet, professional, and devastating confirmation of my victory. Harper's phone must have been melting. Her composure finally, publicly, snapped. A tweet appeared on her personal account, a flash of raw, unfiltered rage. Some people can't build. They can only steal. It was up for less than 5 minutes before she, or a panicked PR person, deleted it. But it was too late. Screenshots are forever. The tweet was everywhere, a permanent record of her loss of control. Her accusation was the desperate cry of someone who had been thoroughly outplayed. Her lawyers followed up with a formal threat, a blustering letter accusing me of intellectual property theft, citing my past employment and access to Northward's proprietary designs. It was the last arrow in her quiver, and it was aimed at a target that wasn't there. My legal team's response was swift and surgical. We didn't argue. We didn't debate. We simply attached a single file to our reply. A compressed folder containing all 27 of my original, non-commercial designs, complete with the digital timestamps proving they had been created years before Vesper Lane was ever conceived. It was the checkmate. We never heard from her lawyers again. The public narrative, which had been simmering, now solidified into a coherent, powerful story. The media no longer had to speculate. They had the characters, the conflict, and the resolution. It was the story of two sisters. One, the polished, PR-savvy CEO who had pushed her own family out and run their father's company into the ground, and the other, the quiet, brilliant engineer and designer who had taken a $70 insult and turned it into a multi-million-dollar brand built on quality, community, and the very skills her sister had never valued. The roles were now set in stone. She was the villain, I was the victor, and the final act was yet to come. The frantic energy of the public relations battle gave way to the quiet, satisfying rhythm of actual work. The narrative was won, the legal threats silenced. Now, all that mattered was building the business we had promised. The validation, when it came, wasn't in a headline or a viral tweet, but in the crisp, unambiguous language of a contract. It came from Vellum Row, one of the country's most respected luxury retailers, a kingmaker known for its discerning taste and refusal to bow to fleeting trends. Their head buyer requested a meeting. She didn't want to talk about my story. She wanted to talk about the clothes. She ran her hands over the fabric of the Rowan trench coat, inspected the internal stitching of the linden trousers, and held up the Vesper blazer to the light, examining its silhouette. 2 days later, a wholesale order landed in my inbox. It wasn't a test run. It was a 2-season commitment to carry the Vesper Lane collection in all of their flagship stores. The total value of the contract was $3.2 million. I stared at the number, my mind struggling to process the scale of it. Jules, reading over my shoulder, pointed to another, even more important figure buried in the terms, a gross margin of 58%. It was a number that commanded respect. It was a number that announced we were not a fluke. We were a serious player. That contract became the cornerstone of our next financial move. Our initial angel investor, the one I had won over with a photo of a gift card, returned to the table. He proposed a seed extension round. Other investors, drawn by the Vellum Row deal and our explosive direct-to-consumer sales, clamored to get in. We closed the $1.8 million round in a week. The number that mattered most to me was on the first page of the term sheet. A pre-money valuation of $6 million. The hook for my story, the aspirational number I had once only dreamed of, was now a legal and financial reality, signed and notarized. With the capital secured, our first priority was a new home. We moved out of my apartment and into the dusty, dormant workshop of Blackline Tailoring. The space was a time capsule, filled with the ghosts of my father's original business. We spent the first week just cleaning, uncovering beautiful old cutting tables and vintage sewing machines. We rebranded it immediately. A simple, elegant sign was installed above the door, reading Vesper Lane Atelier. Our next step was to bring its soul back. I pulled the old employee files for Blackline, the ones Northward had archived when they downsized the division to a skeleton crew. I made a list of every master tailor, pattern maker, and seamstress Harper had laid off over the past 5 years. Then, I started making phone calls. I offered them their old jobs back, but with better pay, full benefits, and a share in the company's profit pool. Every single person I called accepted. The sound of those old machines humming back to life, operated by the skilled hands that had been so carelessly dismissed, was the sweetest kind of victory. The atelier quickly became the heart of the brand. We continued our tradition of stitching customers' names into the linings of their garments, a tangible link to our community. The story of the brand's origin had become a kind of modern folklore. Visitors to the atelier would look around and invariably ask, "So, where is it? The famous hoodie?" I had it framed. It wasn't a small, subtle display. I had a large, museum-quality shadow box made. Inside, the cheap gray hoodie was carefully mounted against a stark white background. Below it, in a separate, smaller cutout, was the $70 gift card. I hung it in the main entryway of the atelier, a silent testament to our founding principles. It wasn't a trophy of revenge, it was our constitution. A few weeks after we moved into the new space, Owen Frost walked through the door. He had resigned from Northward that morning. His final act, he told me with a thin, satisfied smile, was to personally oversee the decommissioning of the old server that housed the fraudulent sales data. I hit the enter key, and it all just went dark, he said. It felt like closing a very heavy door. I hired him on the spot. He became Vesper Lane's chief financial officer, his pragmatism and integrity the perfect ballast for my creative vision. The door Owen closed behind him was one of many that were closing for Harper. Her attempts to spin the sale of Blackline as a strategic masterstroke fell on deaf ears at the Rutledge Fund. The numbers didn't lie. With the fake sell-through data exposed and the autumn collection in shambles, the company was still in breach of its loan covenants. The board, now fully aware of the extent of her mismanagement, acted decisively. Harper was asked to resign, effective immediately, to make way for a corporate restructuring. She was given no party, no grand farewell. She was simply, quietly, erased. The final, public indignity came a week later. On Glassdoor, a long, eloquent, and utterly anonymous review of Northward Collective was posted. It detailed the toxic culture, the management by fear, and a very specific story about how a long-term, high-performing employee was terminated and given a severance package consisting of a promotional hoodie and a $70 gift card. The review never mentioned names, but it didn't have to. Within the industry, everyone knew. The story of the hoodie severance became a cautionary tale, a permanent stain on Northward's reputation. Amidst all this, I made one last trip to the city's old garment district. I went to a small third-floor workshop, the one my father had used for his first production run 30 years ago. The two brothers who now ran it were old friends. I brought them the patterns for a new collection of men's suiting I planned to launch under the Vesper Lane Atelier name. I wasn't asking for a discount or special treatment. I was offering them a full, high-margin contract to be our primary manufacturing partner. When they saw the terms, their eyes welled up. We didn't sign the contract with champagne. We signed it and celebrated with the cold bottles of root beer they always kept in a small fridge in the back, the same way my dad used to. At the end of our first official quarter as a funded company, Owen laid the preliminary financials on my desk. Vesper Lane had cleared $1 million in top-line revenue, the $6 million valuation on the term sheet. The one that had once seemed so audacious now felt conservative. I picked up the framed document, the ink from the investors' signatures still looking fresh and dark against the paper. The value wasn't an estimate anymore. It was a fact, backed by purchase orders, contracts, and the quiet, steady hum of the atelier floor. The auditorium Northward used for its all-hands meetings was on a lower floor, a vast, windowless space with uncomfortable chairs and bad acoustics. It was a room designed for disseminating information, not for creating inspiration. Today, it felt like a courtroom. The air was thick with a nervous, shuffling energy. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a low, monotonous drone, casting a flat gray light over the assembled employees. The Rutledge Capital Fund had called this mandatory town hall to announce the new interim leadership structure, a piece of corporate euphemism so transparent it was insulting. I watched from the wings, just off stage. In the front row, dead center, sat Harper. The last time I had seen her in a room like this, she was on the stage, basking in the spotlight, a charismatic conductor leading an orchestra of applause. Now, she was just a spectator. She wore a simple black dress, but it looked less like a power statement and more like mourning attire. Her hair was pulled back, but the severe elegance was gone, replaced by a weary tension. Her face, usually a perfect mask of makeup and confidence, was pale and unadorned. It was the face of a queen in exile, forced to watch the coronation of her usurper. A partner from Rutledge, a man whose name I neither knew nor cared to learn, was at the podium, wrapping up his remarks with a string of meaningless platitudes about navigating this transition and leveraging our core assets for a brighter future. Then, he looked toward me. "To that end," he announced, "we're pleased to have a key new partner with us today. Many of you know her from her foundational work here at Northward. Please join me in welcoming the new owner of the Blackline Tailoring Division and the founder of Vesper Lane, Nora Keene." A polite, hesitant ripple of applause moved through the room. It was the sound of confusion and apprehension. They knew me, but they didn't understand my new role. They didn't understand what was happening. I walked onto the stage. My heels made a slow, deliberate click-clack on the wooden boards. I wasn't carrying a laptop or a folder of notes. In my hands, I held a single object, a pristine, white gift box, tied with a simple, elegant gray silk ribbon. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, which let out a soft squeal of feedback, and looked out at the sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces. I found my team from the new Vesper Lane Atelier, the former Blackline tailors, sitting together in the third row. They gave me small, encouraging nods. Then, I let my gaze settle on the front row, on Harper. She stared back, her expression a mixture of contempt and exhaustion. I placed the white box on the lectern in front of me. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "Thank you," I began, my voice calm and even, amplified by the speakers throughout the vast room. "It's an honor to be here. Before I talk about the future, I wanted to bring a small gift, a token of my appreciation. You could say, it's a thank you for the invaluable leadership lessons I learned during my time here." My eyes remained locked on Harper's. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even fear, passed through her gaze. She forced a thin, dismissive smile. "Are we done here, Nora?" she said, her voice a low, bitter stage whisper, not meant for the microphone, but audible in the tense silence of the front rows. "Some of us have places to be." "Almost," I replied, my voice still level, still public. "Just one more thing." Slowly, deliberately, I untied the gray silk ribbon. The two ends fell away softly. I lifted the lid off the white box and placed it beside the base. Then, I reached inside. A collective. Soft gasp moved through the auditorium. I pulled out the artifact. It was the cheap gray hoodie, perfectly preserved. Behind it, also visible, was the $70 gift card. I had had them professionally mounted and sealed within a thick, clear block of acrylic. It was no longer a piece of clothing and a piece of plastic. It was a relic, a piece of evidence. The light from the overhead lamps caught the polished edges of the acrylic, making it gleam. I held it up for a moment, letting the entire room see it, letting them process the symbol. Then, I placed it carefully on the podium, angled toward the audience. I leaned into the microphone, creating an intimacy that belied the size of the room. And then I delivered the eulogy. "Here's the hoodie," I said, my voice clear and ringing, each word distinct and perfectly enunciated. "And the $70 card." As the last word left my lips, the massive screen behind me, which had been displaying the Northward Collective logo, flickered and changed. The slide was simple, stark, and brutal. On the left side, in the Northward corporate font, were the words, "Blackline Tailoring." An arrow pointed from it to the right side of the screen, where the elegant serif Vesper Lane logo was displayed, and beneath it, the words, "Vesper Lane Atelier," at the bottom of the screen, in bold, capital letters, "Effective today." The finality of it hung in the air. For a few seconds, there was absolute silence as the two realities, the symbolic humiliation I held in my hands and the corporate execution displayed on the screen, merged into one undeniable truth. Then, a single person began to clap. It was one of the old tailors from Blackline. Then another joined him, then Jules and Maya. The applause was scattered at first, then it began to build, not into a polite corporate clap, but into a genuine, rolling wave of sound. It was the sound of 100 private frustrations being given public voice. It was the sound of a dam breaking. In the front row, Harper stood up abruptly, the scraping sound of her chair lost in the growing ovation. Her face was a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. She looked at the partners from Rutledge, at the employees who were now clapping for her demise, and then at me. And in that moment, she did something I had never seen her do before. She took a half-step backward. It was an involuntary, instinctual retreat, a physical ceding of territory. In that single small movement, she created a vacuum, a visible void where her power used to be. The applause continued to swell. I looked down at the simple, elegant watch on my wrist. The second hand swept upward, marking the time. This was the moment I had planned for, the final entry on a very specific timeline. It was time. The show was over. I held the microphone for a moment longer, letting the wave of applause wash over the stage. It wasn't for me, not really. It was for them. It was the sound of 100 quiet resentments finally being given permission to be loud. I looked past the glare of the stage lights, my gaze sweeping over the employees of the company that had discarded me. I saw confusion on some faces, dawning understanding on others, and on a few, a look of pure, unadulterated glee. I raised my free hand slightly, a gesture to quiet the room. The applause subsided, leaving a charged, expectant silence in its wake. I leaned into the microphone one last time, my voice dropping from a public announcement to a quiet, personal statement that felt as if it were meant for an audience of one. "They always tell you that business isn't personal," I said, my words echoing in the vast, still room. "They say it to justify the numbers on a spreadsheet, the names on a layoff list, but they're wrong. The work we do, the hours we pour from our lives, is deeply personal, and how we treat the people we work with, that is always, always personal." I placed the microphone gently back in its stand, the soft click of it settling into place the only sound. The speech was over. My business here was done. I turned my body away from the podium, away from the audience, and looked directly at the third row, where my team sat, the master tailors, the skilled pattern makers, the artisans of Blackline, who were now the heart of Vesper Lane Atelier. I didn't need to say a word. I simply met their eyes and gave a small, sharp nod. The signal was clear. "It's over. Let's go home." As one, they began to stand, gathering their things with a quiet dignity. Their movement was a silent act of secession, a quiet exodus from the old regime. From the front row, I saw Harper lurch forward, her face a storm of fury. Her mouth opened, and I could see she was shouting something, her words desperate and venomous, meant to wound me one last time, but no sound came. In the chaos of the transition, someone in the audio-visual booth had already cut the microphones on the floor. Her voice was swallowed by the cavernous room, a silent movie of a queen raging against a world that no longer listened. A cameraman, following the drama, swung his lens toward her, but her powerless, soundless tirade was just a fleeting image of impotent rage before he panned away. She had been rendered irrelevant. I walked to the edge of the stage, my steps measured and unhurried. I descended the small set of stairs to the main floor, the white gift box now back in my hands. I walked down the center aisle, the sea of employees parting for me as I passed. I didn't stop until I reached the front row, until I stood before the chair where Harper had been sitting moments before she stood up to her own execution. It was empty now, a void. I carefully folded the gray silk ribbon and placed it inside the box with the acrylic-encased hoodie and gift card. I put the lid back on. Then, I leaned over and placed the pristine white box squarely in the center of the empty seat. A final delivery. I was returning her gift, leaving the past right where it belonged. I turned without a backward glance and walked toward the exit at the rear of the auditorium. As I pushed open the heavy doors, the dull, recycled air of the meeting hall gave way to the bright, clean light of the main lobby. The afternoon sun of Briarfield was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, bathing the entire space in a warm, golden glow. It felt like stepping into a different world. As I walked across the polished marble floor, my reflection moved with me. For a moment, my own image was superimposed over the view of the street outside, and for a fleeting second, as I passed the main revolving doors, the sunlight caught the newly etched glass in just the right way. Reflected back at me, shimmering in the light, was the elegant, confident logo of Vesper Lane. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, not breaking my stride. It was an email. The sender was our new bank. The subject line contained only 2 words: "Wire received." It was done. The funds for the acquisition of Blackline Tailoring had been transferred. The deal was closed. The asset was mine. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. There was no need for a dramatic reaction, no need for a triumphant fist pump. The victory was quiet, absolute, and confirmed by a digital receipt. There would be no more moves against Harper. There would be no more public battles. The war was over because I had won. Completely. To continue the fight would be to remain tethered to the very past I had just escaped. The anger that had fueled me for months had burned itself out, leaving behind not ash, but a tempered, focused calm. The only reminder I would ever need was already hanging on the wall of my new studio. The framed hoodie, It wasn't a symbol of hate, it was a symbol of origin, a reminder of the $70 price tag they had tried to put on my soul, and a permanent testament to the fact that I had refused to sell. I pushed through the revolving door and stepped out onto the bustling city street. The cool autumn air felt clean and new. I paused on the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and whispered the words, just for myself, a final, quiet closing of the ledger. True value, I said to the open air, is never a gift card. The door swung shut behind me. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We'd love to build a community right here. So please comment below and let us know where in the world you're listening from. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And finally, if you really want to support us, hit that hype button. It tells the algorithm that this is a story worth sharing and helps it get heard by so many more people. Thank you again.